We're learning the laws of Kashrut. It works. Yeah, we're learning laws of Kashrut. Continuing on where we started yesterday about the dishes. We learned the three major types of how to make dishes kosher once they've absorbed taste, like from the Midianites in the Torah, either by fire, by hot water, or some things just need to be washed off with cold water. And we said the principle is kibolo kach polto, as they were absorbed, the same method that the taste was absorbed into them, that's the same way it gets released from them. And so, of course, the danger is that if you cook your food that you want it to be kosher food in a non-kosher pot, then the taste will be released from the pot into your kosher food and make it non-kosher, because you'll have a mixture of kosher and non-kosher food. That's not good. So in order to kosherize the dishes, you can put them through a process which makes the non-kosher taste get released, gets spit out from them, and then when you use it subsequently with your kosher food, there won't be any non-kosher taste left to ruin your food, and you'll have perfectly kosher food. Okay? So this is a little bit of a review. We talked about how much taste is absorbed before we discussed the science. How much taste halachically do we consider to be absorbed? We said we go l'chumra usually, even though you could, if you had a non-Jew around, you could ask him to taste it for you. It's sometimes hard to exactly get the right measure of sensitivity to the non-kosher taste or to the other milk taste in the meat pot or whatever it is, and therefore we usually use the general principle of 1/60th. And since most pots don't have the content being 1/60th more than the entire thickness of the pot itself, the base and the walls of the pot, that we assume, and we said that the principle is we assume that the entire thickness of the pot is filled with that non-kosher taste. We have to get rid of it. It's not enough just to say, oh, it'll just be a small amount, it's mixed in, it'll become batel, it'll become nullified. We don't usually have that ability, and therefore we have to kosher the dishes by one of the methods that we mentioned earlier. Today, I'm going to let you in on a secret. It's a very useful secret. If you are going to become a rabbi, it'd be you're going to get lots of questions like this, and you'll be able, hopefully even without being a rabbi, you might have mix-ups in your kitchen at home, and this is a very useful detail.
If it's cold, it's okay?
And that is close, but let's say even if it's hot, let's say you have a dish which became treif, right? In other words, there's non-kosher taste in the pot. You take a pot from your non-Jewish friend's house, and I don't know what you were thinking, but you said, I want to cook up my soup. I need a pot, and you borrow the pot, and you make your soup. Is your soup kosher? Can your soup be kosher? We just went through a whole description of saying the Jews took the pots from the Midianites. They had to kosherize them. They had to put them through fire or boiling hot water in order to get rid of the taste. So how is it? Can I even ask the question? Of course it's not kosher. The answer is that there is an expiry date. The halacha understands that absorbed taste into the vessel is only potent for 24 hours. Yes. Halacha l'maisa, this is the way we paskin. That if you cook your chicken soup in your milchik pot, you use the pot to make pasta with cheese, as long as 24 hours has passed since you made the pasta with cheese in your milchik pot, before you put in your hot water and chicken or meat or whatever it is, the meat soup remains kosher. Because even though we just said the taste absorbed in the pot is going to get released and enter the food, and so you have milk entering the food, and we said usually if we assume that the taste is absorbed throughout the entire thickness of the pot, you're not going to have 60 times the thickness of pot in the chicken soup or in the meat stew. You don't have 1/60th. How could it be kosher? The answer is, as long as it's been 24 hours since the pot was used with the milky products, or even non-kosher products from your neighbor, the non-Jew, from your Midianite neighbor, no Midianites. But if you have a Midianite pot and you were to use it, if it's after 24 hours, the taste that is absorbed, and even if it gets released, it doesn't have the status of the being potent, and the taste doesn't get transferred into your food. And so many times the pot is still not kosher. The pot is really problematic because now the pot has absorbed taste of meat after it originally absorbed taste of milk. We don't do that. We don't keep one pot and say, well, I'll just wait 24 hours. I'll use the pot for milchik one day, and then the next day, as long as it's 24 hours later, I'll use the same pot for fleischiks. We don't do that. The rabbis forbade that. But the food itself doesn't become non-kosher. And this is a very important leniency that people don't realize. It's the law, but even if you make a mistake in the kitchen many times, the food does not become treif. I'll just add one more thing and I'll take your questions. One more thing I wanted to add is that there's even a bigger leniency. Let's say you don't know if 24 hours have passed. You take the pot out of your cupboard, and you don't know whether your wife made pasta with cheese. You don't know if your kid put cheese into his egg, or whatever it is, and then you used it now for fleishik. You got mixed up, you put meat in it. Is the food kosher or not? The answer is yes. The food is still kosher. Why? We have a principle. The principle is stam kelim. That means dishes. By default, that's what the word stam means in this context. It means not otherwise known, not otherwise identified, not otherwise clearly that it's been used. Stam kelim einan bnei oman. Most pots are not used within 24 hours. Many times you have a pot that hasn't been used for years. Every once in a while you make a dish, but you use the same pot within 24 hours. The Gemara says very clearly, we assume, if you know, of course, you're in trouble. If you know that it's been within 24 hours, but if you don't know, and if you know that it's been more than 24 hours, the food will be kosher. It won't absorb any potent, non-kosher or opposite taste. But if you don't know, and you use the pot, and you can't figure it out, if you can find out, you can ask the people, did you use that pot within 24 hours? So there's no doubt. But in a case of doubt, where you took a pot out of the cupboard and you don't know, and your roommate is on a plane now, and you can't reach him, and you don't know, or they fell off the face of the earth for some reason, you don't know whether the pot's been used within 24 hours or not. The assumption is most pots have not been used in the previous 24 hours, and therefore the food will remain kosher. It won't have absorbed any potent taste. We can assume that it won't have absorbed any potent taste because it's been more than 24 hours. Okay, now I'll take the questions. Ben, you start.
So when we talk about taste, are we talking about like something like just like a general halakhic abstract category called taste, or are we talking about things that like actually impact the taste?
It's a good question.
Right?
We touched.
When we talk about like a pot, right? that absorb flavor, that like quote unquote absorb flavor. If
Yeah.
after you wash it with soap, you kind of took everything out and anything there is disgusting, like did it actually absorb any taste?
Right. So we had this discussion yesterday. Unfortunately, you weren't here, so we'll try to repeat it a little bit. Chaim, welcome, Chaim. Shalom Aleichem. Nice to meet you. Where are you from?
I live in Rehavia now.
Live in Rehavia. Good. Originally from?
I was born in Chicago.
Chicago. I'm sorry. Sorry for you, but
All right, if someone already else is
anyway, so we discussed it yesterday, but I will just briefly repeat. It's going to come up again as well. The answer is it's complicated. The simple reading is that we're actually worried about actual taste, and that's why if you have somebody who's a non-Jew can come and taste it and says, "Okay, you had a drop of milk fall into the soup, but I can't taste any milkiness. It's kosher." Right? So the standard way of reading the Gemara, the discussions, is that we're talking about real taste. And the taste can be tasted, and then if you can't taste it, so you measure, you say 1/60th and so forth. However, it's not so simple because it could be that these rules have solidified into not actual taste, but halachic taste. In other words, it's created concepts of what we have to take into account, what we have to consider when we're talking about non-kosher food or mixing of meat and milk. And so there's a debate about this until today, but the simple answer is it's actually real taste. Yesterday we talked about that some pots and pans, what you might be tasting is the residue from outside the pot and pan, that's like greasy, oily stuff that you didn't get off well enough. And sometimes you might actually be tasting taste from within the pot. The pot does absorb, some pots do absorb taste that gets imbued in the food afterwards, in the next food afterwards. So we're going to discuss it again, but the simple answer is, for now, we're treating it as if it's real taste, and we're assuming that certain materials absorb taste. And the rabbis, when they, with their wisdom, defined that after 24 hours it's not potent, they were saying from their experience that whatever taste is there is going to be so minimal, we don't consider it halachically to be taste. And maybe that's even stronger than if you were to taste it. If you say 24 hours is the rule, so here you can see we're moving from real taste to halachically defined taste. Once we're giving these absolute numbers, 24 hours. Okay, 24 hours, but what if you can still taste it afterwards? If you're going to be a formalist, you're saying, well, the formula is, the structure is 24 hours. Rabbi said, after 24 hours. Whether you can taste it or not, it's not halachically significant. So that's so he says we start off with the concept of real taste, but very quickly the halacha sort of turns into these rules that are formal rules as defined by the sages. Like I said before, you can assume that 24 hours has passed, and if you do, then you don't have any more valid or potent non-kosher taste in the vessel. Another question.
I have another question. A food that has been cooked in less than 24 hours is called nolad?
No.
The pot? Neither?
No. Nolad's a different word from a different set of halachot. Talk about it by the laws of Shabbat. There's something called nolad. You can use the word that their taste got absorbed. You can say it was born into the pot. But that's not a common phrase that's used in this context. Another question, and then I'll take you, Yossi, you're next.
For example, I cook beans in a pot where I usually cook only meat.
Yeah.
I cook beans without meat.
Right.
If I wait more than 24 hours, can I eat the beans with something milky?
That's a good question. What you're asking me is about cooking on purpose. We've been discussing is accidents. Right? We did mention that the sages didn't want us to have one pot, both for milchik and for fleishik.
Yeah, but I had only one.
But here, you're not intentionally cooking fleshik in it. You're cooking something parv in it, beans. And the question is, does that taste get absorbed? The answer is very simple. We learned that after 24 hours, those beans are parva. But then you asked, can you do that on purpose? If you know that you're going to be eating those beans with a meat meal, are you allowed to cook them in a milchik pot? Here,
No.
so the Ashkenazim are very careful about that. There's a difference between lechatchila and b'diavad. We learned about it in the other class. We know these words. Lechatchila is the ideal way of doing things. Almost everybody agrees. The Ashkenazim agree that it's not the ideal way. If you're cooking up even parva foods for a fleshich meal, don't use your milchik pots. Lechatchila. B'diavad, after the fact, if it's already been done and then you want to use some of the beans, you say, I made those beans so that they should be parva. I wasn't planning them to use them in the meat meal. But afterwards, once they're already made, you say, this will go perfect with the steak that I'm making. And you want to serve them together with the steak. So most Ashkenazi poskim say that's allowed, because technically, didn't absorb any milchik taste. And you didn't really intend to use a milchik pot for a fleshich meal. But we're going to get to those laws later. That's a separate question of how to manage your kitchen, lechatchila and b'diavad. But according to the rules we learned, the bottom line is those beans they don't have any milky taste in them. Okay? Yossi, that's you in there? Back there in the corner hiding behind the stender?
Yes.
Okay, terrific.
Is the pot, is it still kosher or does it need to be kosher now?
That's the second half of the equation, is that the pot is not kosher. The pot, any pot that absorbed milky taste, and then if you cook meat in it, even if it's been 24 hours, the food is still kosher, but the pot is not kosher. So the pot has been used for milchik, and then for fleshiks, you have to do hachsharat kelim. Yes, Yossi?
Even vice versa, yeah?
Correct. Also vice versa. The pot is problematic, but you can fix it, but the food is kosher. Hirsch?
So we should have at least one pot for basadi foods, at least one pot for halal foods.
Yeah.
So we also have at least one pot for bar foods.
It depends. It depends what style of eating do you do. Some people never eat parva foods, but it can be useful. Many people do have parva pots and knives. We're going to come back to this issue when we talk about knives. Knives with sharp foods. It's a particular spicy issue that we'll talk about later. But yes, in general, it's good to have a milchik pot for milchik foods and fleshik pot for fleshik foods. Moshe?
It's just something I've noticed that it seems to be universal across all the world, that the color red is fleshik, the color blue is milchik, and the color green or yellow is parva. And there's never any there's never any drifting away from this standard.
Interesting.
This seems to be the international standard. Huh?
It's a good question. It's a good question.
What's different? Ezra, you're just special guy.
I don't know how that came about. I mean, red with meat makes sense. Red meat, right?
I think
Blood,
Early colored plasticware.
Cheese is blue?
You get blue cheese.
Blue
I
cheese.
think it has to do with early plasticware.
I don't know. We're going to talk about this issue of putting on labels and how to make marks to separate your different types of dishes so they don't get mixed up. Usually you mark the milchik set. The milchik in the army, if you put on paint, blue paint, it comes off very quickly. So they actually put holes. They have a metal hole punch that all the milchik pots get a hole in them. Now, hopefully not on the bottom of the pot, but in the handle and not in the middle of the spoon either. And the handles they put holes, and that signifies the milchik. But that we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're at the very, very beginning of understanding the basics of taste absorbing into vessels and how it gets released into the next foods And we've learned some very important principles. Kibolo kachpolto. Now we learned about it's called, let's see if you should have the terms. The term we just learned now is called ben yomo. Ben yomo. The vessel, the pot, was used within the day, within its day. So it's like you say, Ben Torah, somebody who is following the Torah, who has accomplished the Torah, and Bar Mitzvah, somebody who is now obligated in Mitzvah. Bar is just, that's an Aramaic version of Ben Mitzvah. And so you have Ben Yomo, it's a product of its day.
A vessel that was used that day?
That day. A vessel that was used that day, within 24 hours, is the way we define a day. And that's Ben Yomo. So only if the pot is Ben Yomo does it have the ability to infect the next food, to pass on the taste that was absorbed into its walls to the next food. And that could be dangerous if it's milk pot and meat food. It could be less dangerous if it's just parva food from a milk pot. You'll have milky beans if it's within 24 hours. You won't be able to use those beans together with the meat if it's been 24 hours. But if it's not ben yomo, if it's not within 24 hours, then the beans can be used. Whether you planned it or not is another separate issue that we said we have to talk about. But in most cases, it can be used with the fleishich food because the beans are parv. Even though they were cooked in a milchik pot, they're parved because it was 24 hours since that pot was used with milky substance. So the absorption only lasts, that's what I said, it has an expiry date on it. The milk that gets absorbed into the vessel has an expiry date of exactly 24 hours after it gets absorbed. Is that clear? Okay, so that's Ben Yomo. And what I said in addition to that is Stam Kelim B'nei Yoman. That the Stam Kelim means your average or your default vessel that you find in your kitchen, anywhere, if you have a pot and you're not sure whether it is within 24 hours of being cooked with it absorbing taste or not, we say the default is Stam Kelim Einan B'nei Yoman. They're not. Right? Or Stam Kli Eino Ben Yomo, in singular. In plural, it's Stam Kelim Einan B'nei Yoman. We can assume that most of the dishes have not been used within the last 24 hours. Very useful. Yes, Ben?
So, I don't understand why. Okay, so you're saying that the pot after Ben Yomo,
after 24 hours, yeah. Whatever taste was in there, it's not potent enough to make any effect
So the pot's
on the
not
food.
whatever food you cook in it,
Is kosher.
furthermore, is kosher. So why does it matter that the pot's not cooking?
Good. So there is a second halacha, which is important to know, and that is that the rabbis don't want you to use on purpose, sort of like Thomas's situation, but not exactly. They don't want you on purpose to use non-kosher vessels. So that's why it might even be a mitzvah, might even be doraita mitzvah to do hachsharat kelim. If you have pots that got non-kosher taste in them, I don't need to have kosher pots. I don't need to have kosher dishes. I can go to any pork restaurant, if you could find one. I go into any lobster restaurant and use all their dishes and take them into my kosher kitchen as long as I put on a stopwatch and I wait 24 hours. None of the taste is going to go into my food. I can make kosher food in those non-kosher dishes. That's true, according to everything we just said. However, the rabbis didn't like that. And some people say even midoraita, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to use non-kosher pots to cook kosher food. Some people say midirabanan, some people say midoraita. And so that's there is a fine. For example, if someone did this on purpose, the rabbi said, we declare that food not kosher. So if you took you nicked a pot from the lobster restaurant, waited 24 hours, and you purposefully cooked your kosher chicken in it, the rabbi said, we're going to fine you, and that food is not kosher. But if you're the guy who's the criminal. But let's say you come by and you say, there's some chicken soup. I'm really hungry. And the guy tells you what he did, that he violated this rabbinic stricture, and he took a non-kosher pot after 24 hours, and he cooked kosher food. For you, you're the third party. You're not involved. You didn't do anything wrong. The food is kosher. The food is kosher. Because that's what we've been describing all along. If it's after 24 hours, no non-kosher taste had entered this kosher chicken, and so the food is kosher. The fine is against the perpetrator, the person who violated the laws, who tried to use non-kosher pots, and so that's the fine is only for him. But that's a rabbinic fine. Some say it's a mitzvah, therefore, to get rid of that taste, to kosher the dishes, so that you don't have non-kosher dishes around. The rabbis didn't want you to maybe making mistakes, because if you say, now I'm taking the dish that was non-kosher because my roommate didn't use it within 24 hours, and then he comes home and says, actually I had a late night snack, and I did heat up my pepperoni and pizza in this dish, and then you're going to get mixed up, because it's very hard to know, was it within 24 hours, was that 24 hours? The rabbi said, we don't want you doing that, and therefore there's a fine if you actually do that on purpose. They declare the food not kosher. But if you didn't do anything wrong, and even if somebody else did something wrong, the food technically doesn't have any non-kosher taste after 24 hours from that pot's use. Okay, clear? Okay, great. We can continue. We have a few minutes. Open up a Chumash. Everybody, right next to Ruvain, there's Tanachim. Should be one for everybody, except for Moshe, who's going to look on his computer. And I see that Natan is already preparing. He's looking up things. He's looking up Pasuk in Vayikra. I know. Vayikra Perik Vav, Pasuk Chafalef, chapter 6 in Vayikra, verse 21. We have Vayikra, that's Leviticus.
6:21, right?
6:21. That's it.
Come on, man.
You're so quick with those fingers. Go ahead. Read it, Ezra. Ukli cheres. Kli cheres. Yes. Stop there.
In which it was boiled shall be broken. If it was boiled in a copper vessel, the vessel should be scoured and rinsed with water.
All right. What's the context? Vayikra. What does it talk about usually? Most of Vayikra. Vayikra, chapter 6. Come on, you guys know what Vayikra is about.
About impurity and about
Good, but
animals.
the animal sacrifices in the temple. That's right. So the verse, chapter 6, verse 21, is talking about when you bring a korban. And some of the korbanot, you have to boil up, and then the Kohanim eat them. And the verse says, read the English, Ezra, again.
The earthen vessel in which it was boiled should be broken. If it was boiled in a copper vessel, the vessel should be scoured and rinsed with water.
Okay, so it says that if it's earthenware, the material is not metal that we've been talking about now, the gold, silver, right? The Midianites, the pasuk about the Midianites spoke about the lead and the different types of brass and gold and silver, and that you have to put them in fire if they're used with fire. Here the Torah says, if you cook up a korban, I assume it's kosher, in earthenware pot, clay, there are the ceramics, yeah. Porcelain is made from earth. It's made from sand. Different, yeah. So that sounds like what the Torah is saying is that can never become kosher. You have to break it. See, what happens is the korban is only valid for a certain amount of time. Every korban, every sacrifice has its expiry date. Some of it is for only the nighttime, some of it is nighttime and daytime, some of it is nighttime, daytime, and the next night and the next day, sometimes 2 days. So whatever, each one according to its rules, after that time, the food, you're not allowed to eat it. It's a korban after its time, it's forbidden. And basically what happens is that when you cook up the korban in the earthenware vessel, it absorbs the taste of the korban. After the expiry time of the korban, it has non-kosher taste in it. What we understand is earthenware absorbs taste. It's very, very hard to get it out. And therefore, the only solution is to break it. That's it. It's only, can never be kashered. Right? Everything we talked about, kashering through fire or through, the truth is, and that doesn't apply. Everything we said about kashering vessels doesn't apply to earthenware. Earthenware cannot be kashered. The truth is the pasuk compares it to brass. If the vessel is made from brass, you can kasher it. Brass, usually it's used with water inside, so you put it into boiling hot water. That releases the taste, gets rid of all the previous taste, if it was forbidden taste, and that is reusable. But earthenware, if you use it for a korban, it gets the forbidden korban taste in it. It has to be broken. Kli cheres shetevushal bo yishaver. It must be broken. The truth is, I'll take your question in just a second. The truth is that it doesn't say anything about firing it up in the kiln. Refiring maybe does. Maybe it is so powerful. And even though earthenware really absorbs more taste than any other type of material, it could be that if you refire it, it's like you're recreating it again, and it can be kashered, but usually it gets broken. And so the rabbi said, earthenware cannot be kashered. And that's what we practice until today. There are very, very few and far between extreme, exceptional cases where it can be allowed, but we'll talk about that another time. The bottom line is that the only really way that possibly you could get the taste out of earthenware is by burning it, and burning it usually ruins it, unless you actually put it into a furnace, which is designed for that. Possibly it could work, but the rabbis were afraid that you're going to be trying to use a blowtorch on this earthenware vessel, but you won't want to ruin it. Usually the vessel's just going to break, and so you won't do a good job. And the bottom line is they say we cannot kasher earthenware vessels. Somebody had a question here. Was it Ben? Yeah.
So what about glass? Or like good glaze?
That's the next topic.
That's the next one. I actually have some of the same ones.
You're following, great. You're following online with the Pnei Halacha, perfect. You can see what I'm doing. Excellent.
No, I just had an interesting thing to say that.
Please.
Have you heard of this glass type called Corel?
Yes.
What's the?
We're gonna get to it. We're gonna get to it. But
I went to someone's house and he only uses one set of.
Right.
10,
right.
So
let's.
She used it for meat and dairy, and I was like, what are you doing with this?
The issue of glass was brought up in the time of the medieval period amongst the Rishonim, and some people said that, glass is made from sand. Sand is like earth. Sand should have the law of earthenware. And therefore, if it absorbs taste, we don't kasher earthenware vessels, so we can't kasher glass vessels either. Glass has the same halachic status as earthenware vessels. Other people said, hang on, the glass we make now is so hard. It's not porous at all, like earthenware. We understand it absorbs everything. You can see it, you can taste it. The glass that we have is so smooth and so hard, it doesn't absorb anything, and it shouldn't have the status of earthenware. As a matter of fact, it should even be less absorbing than metal.
Right.
Metal, you can understand. We talked about cast iron. We talked about but the glass, it absorbs the least of any of the materials that we're talking about, and maybe you don't even have to kosher it because it never absorbs the non-kosher taste, and so you don't have to release it. It's not very good to absorb. You can use it with milk. It won't absorb the milky taste, and the very same day, within 24 hours, use it for fleishik because it doesn't absorb any taste. All the rules we've been talking about now is based on the absorption of the vessel. But if you say that glass doesn't absorb, believe it or not, until today, there are some rabbis, and some people practice this in their homes, they only have one set of dishes made out of glass. Now, pots, it's a little more complicated, but there's a range of opinions here. The most common approach is the middle ground. We don't say that glass is like earthenware and therefore can never be kashered. On the other hand, we don't say that glass never absorbs and doesn't need kashering. What's the middle ground? Is that we treat it like metal. Is that we assume it absorbs a little bit, and the way you can get rid of it, you can release it by putting it into water. Like it's usually glass is used, not usually used on the fire. Usually glass is used with liquids, and so you put it in hachshara. Into boiling hot water. We're going to learn the details of that when we get to it. So until today, there are different customs among different communities in Israel how to treat glass. Famously, Rabbi Yosef was defending the custom of some communities amongst the Middle East, where they until today, some families, they use only one set of plates, which are made out of glass. But most poskim, including most Sephardi poskim, and almost all Ashkenazi poskim, don't agree with that, and they say that the middle ground, at least, is that if it's like metal dishes, that if you use it with milchiks, it has milchiks, and then if you want to use it for the other one, you have to do hachshara, you have to put it through the boiling hot water. And there's some Ashkenazim which are even more machmir, and they say glass absorbs. It's made from sand. It has the law of the earthenware vessels, and it never releases the taste. And so, if you once by accident used your glass dish in order to, you wanted to keep it parv, but you didn't, and you put milk in it or meat in it, it will remain meaty or fleishiks for the rest of its life, and it can never be kashered. So this is the standard Ashkenazi psak, actually, but the Eved, if it happened, many Ashkenazi poskim also say that you can, like before Pesach, you'll see that some people don't kasher their chametz, the glass, and make it kosher for Pesach, but some do, and they say it's allowed. We're going to talk about more of the details next time. We have to stop here, so you have a little break before the next class, and we will continue with the laws of Kashrut tomorrow. Bezrat Hashem. Yes, Arya.
So, say you have like a dairy dish, it's made out of glass. You can put parv food in it. Does that food still stay parv, or does it become dairy?
If it depends if it was used within 24 hours or not.
Okay.
If the dairy was used within 24 hours, it becomes dairy. If it wasn't,